Take a look at this. Follow the northeast coast of England up toward the Scottish border, and just offshore you will find a small, low island shaped a little like a teardrop. Twice a day, the sea pulls back, and a thin road rises out of the wet sand to join it to the mainland. And twice a day, the tide swallows that road again, and the island goes back to being an island. People still misjudge it. They get caught halfway across as the water rises, abandon their cars, and climb the wooden refuge towers that stand out on the sands, and they wait there until the sea decides to let them go. For most of its long history, almost nothing happened on this quiet, holy rock. And then, on one summer morning, 1,200 years ago, ships appeared on the water that nobody recognized, and the whole history of Europe changed direction. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. When I first found this place on a map, I felt something I didn't expect, because this little island is not just old, it is the place where an entire age of the world is said to have begun. Historians can point to it and give you a date, almost to the hour. This is Lindisfarne, the Holy Island. And this is the story of the day the Viking Age began, and the strange 100-year journey that followed it. The story starts in the year 635. A king of Northumbria named Oswald wanted to bring Christianity to his people, and he sent for a gentle Irish monk named Aidan from the island of Iona off the coast of Scotland. Oswald gave Aidan this tidal island to build a monastery on, and it was perfect. Cut off by the tide twice a day, it was quiet enough for prayer, but close enough to the mainland to stay connected. From this one small rock, monks walked out across the north of England and slowly, patiently, converted an entire kingdom. They founded new churches. They taught farmers to read. Lindisfarne became the beating heart of Christianity in the north of England, and for a while, in a violent and uncertain age, this little island was one of the most learned and peaceful places in all of Europe. But the island's fame, and its fate, came down to one man. His name was Cuthbert. He came from the Scottish borders, and the story goes that as a teenage boy, out watching sheep on the hills one night, he saw a vision of angels carrying a shining soul up into heaven. He later learned that at that exact moment, Aidan, the founder of Lindisfarne, had died far away. Cuthbert took it as a sign, and he gave his life to God. He became a monk, then the prior of Lindisfarne, but what he wanted, more than anything, was solitude. So he went out to an even smaller, wilder rock nearby called Inner Farne, and he built himself a hermit's cell with walls so high that when he stood inside it, he could see nothing at all but the sky above him. He did that on purpose. He wanted nothing between himself and heaven. They dragged him back to make him a bishop, because the whole kingdom loved him. He served for 2 years. And then, feeling death coming, he went home to his little cell on the rock, and he died there on the 20th of March, 687. And this is where the story turns strange. 11 years after they buried him, the monks decided to move Cuthbert's bones into a finer shrine. They lifted the lid of his stone coffin, expecting dust. And what they found instead was Cuthbert, whole, undecayed, his limbs still soft, his clothes still fresh, looking, one of them wrote, as if he were not dead but only sleeping. Just sit with that for a second. Whatever you believe happened in that coffin, imagine being one of those monks, lifting that lid and seeing the face of a man dead for 11 years looking back at you as though he might open his eyes. To them, there was only one explanation. Cuthbert was a saint. And Lindisfarne became the holiest place in the north of England. Pilgrims came from everywhere. Kings sent gold and land. And in Cuthbert's honor, a bishop of the island named Eadfrith sat down and created the Lindisfarne Gospels, an illuminated manuscript so beautiful it is still considered one of the greatest artworks ever made in Britain. So picture this island now, at the end of the 700s. Rich, famous, piled with treasure and gold and holy relics, and sitting out on the open sea, connected to nothing, defended by nobody but a community of unarmed monks who had never in their lives imagined they might need defending. The trap was set. And in the summer of 793 it was sprung. There had been one strange warning 4 years earlier. In 789, 3 ships of unknown men had landed on the south coast of England, and when a royal official rode down to ask their business, they struck him down. It was the first the English had ever heard of these strangers from the sea. But it was a distant rumor, quickly forgotten. Nobody connected it to a quiet monastery in the far north. Nobody imagined what was coming. The chroniclers say the year 793 began with terrible omens. They wrote of great sheets of lightning across the sky of Northumbria, of whirlwinds, and, they insisted, of fiery dragons seen flying in the air. A famine followed. The people were frightened, and they did not know why. And then, on the 8th of June, the ships came. They came from across the North Sea, long and shallow and fast, most likely from the coast of Norway, and the monks of Lindisfarne had no idea what they were. Nobody did. In all the centuries anyone could remember, no enemy had ever come out of the open sea like this. The monks who walked down to meet the strangers on the beach were men who had never held a weapon in their lives, and the men stepping off those ships had come for everything the island had. What happened next was written down by a scholar named Alcuin, a man from Northumbria who was living far away at the court of Charlemagne when the news reached him. His words still carry the shock of it, 1200 years later. He wrote of the church of St. Cuthbert, spattered with the blood of the priests of God. He wrote that never before had such terror appeared in Britain, and he wrote the thing that made this raid different from any misfortune before it. Nobody, he said, had ever thought that such an attack could even be made from the sea. That was what broke the old world. Not just the violence, though the monks who met them were struck down, or dragged away in chains, or driven into the water. It was the sudden, sickening understanding that the sea, which had always been a wall around them, was now a road down which anyone could come, at any time, without warning. The treasures were stripped from the altars, the relics were scattered, the Gospels barely survived. And the news raced across Europe like a crack across ice, because if Lindisfarne, the holiest and most protected place in the north, could be undone in a single morning, then nowhere on any coast in Christendom was safe. Historians mark that one day, the 8th of June, 793, as the beginning of the Viking Age. The next year they hit the monastery at Jarrow. The year after that they fell on Iona, the very island Aidan had come from. The raids became a tide of their own, coming again and again, year after year, for the better part of a century. And the monks of Lindisfarne lived in that fear for generations, never knowing when the sails would appear again. Until at last, in the year 875, they gave up. With a great Viking army moving through the north, the monks made the decision to leave Holy Island forever. But they would not leave Cuthbert behind. A small band of monks went into the church, and they lifted the wooden coffin of their saint, dead now for almost 200 years, up onto their shoulders, and they carried him off the island, out across the same tidal sands you can still walk today, away from the only home their community had ever known. And so began one of the strangest journeys in the history of England. For 7 years these homeless monks wandered the north of England and the borders of Scotland, carrying the body of Cuthbert and the great Gospels with them everywhere they went. 7 years, with no home, guarding a dead man and a book. They rested him for a while at a place called Chesterless Street. Then danger came again, and they moved again. And then, the story goes, as they traveled near a place called Dunholm, the cart carrying Cuthbert's coffin simply stopped. It would not move another inch, no matter what they did. One of the monks had a vision that the saint wished to rest there, and when the monks, not knowing the way, overheard 2 milkmaids talking about a lost brown cow that had wandered off to Dunholm, they followed them, and they found the place. That place is Durham. The church they built there to hold Cuthbert's body grew, over the centuries, into Durham Cathedral, one of the greatest buildings in all of England. The city itself grew up around the grave of a monk from a tiny island 100 miles to the north. Cuthbert is still there today, beneath a simple stone slab behind the high altar. Nearly 1,000 years after that cart refused to move, people still come to kneel at his grave. And the Lindisfarne Gospels, the book those monks carried through every single mile of that 100-year funeral, survived all of it. You can go and see them now, safe behind glass, in the British Library in London. And Lindisfarne itself? The monks came back, eventually. A new priory was built, whose red stone ruins still stand on the island today. And even in the worst of the Viking years, someone had quietly stayed. Archaeologists have found more than 20 carved stones from those centuries of terror, which means that all through the raids, somebody on that island kept burying their dead in the old holy ground and kept believing it was worth doing. Sometimes the smallest places hold the biggest stories. This low teardrop of land, that is only an island half the time, was the cradle of Christianity in the north of England, the home of a saint whose body would not decay, and the birthplace of one of the most beautiful books in the world. And it was the place where, on a single summer morning, the old world learned that the sea was no longer a wall. The Vikings took its treasure and its peace, but they could not take its saint, because his monks carried him 100 years to keep him safe, and they could not take its story because we are still telling it. The tide still covers the road twice a day, and the ruins still stand on the hill, looking out at the water, waiting to see what comes across it next. If you've ever heard of Lindisfarne, or walked across those sands, or stood in Durham where the journey ended, let me know in the comments, and let me know where I should go next. See you in the next one.